I think the spiritual drive is fundamentally intertwined with the fear of death, right? Um, I mean, as you were saying with Nietzsche before, that sort of nested within every fear is some kind of hope. And when there's fear of uncertainty, for instance, that manifests itself in like hope for truth, to ground you into something solid. And the same with fear of death. When there's fear of death, there's like a hope for immortality. And of course, that manifests itself in varying ways. In a cynical perspective, you'd say that's the source of all religions, is to try and quell this fear of death. But yeah, I mean, the fear of death is fundamental in sort of like everything to do. We don't think about it that much, but I mean, if we know anything from psychology, if Freud ever taught us anything, it's that the stuff that we don't think about is actually what drives our actions the most. Because we've repressed that which we don't think about. I mean, maybe I'll ask you this. It's something actually that I ask all people who are very much into philosophy, my fellow students or whatever, because I do think it's a fundamental drive, especially for people pursuing philosophy and intellectuals. Like, do you remember the moment you realized that you were going to die when you were a child?
Um, that's a good question. And I really hope that people in the comments, I'm gonna clip this and make this a TikTok video. And I hope that people in the comments give their answers. Um, do you know what? I probably thought about death for a really long time. Like a really, really long. It's kind of an obsession. It was an obsession of mine. It still is. Do you know? I did you ever have this as a kid? I used to be kind of convinced that okay, so my name Athanasios, which is the full name, literally means in Greek the one who never dies. So it's been like it's been something that like I as a kid was like, oh, like maybe I'm unique, maybe I'm destined to never die, right? And then this was kind of right at the time of those Percy Jackson books were coming out, and I was like, maybe I'm, maybe I'm like this is full disclosure. I was like, maybe I'm like a demigod or something, or like maybe maybe I'm like different or something, or maybe like I'm past that. And that was kind of subconsciously because nobody wants to die. Nobody wants, especially when you're a kid, you think it's the worst thing possible. It's like, how can that there just be nothing? Um, that is the ultimate fear, is like, and as a kid, you don't think about this far down, but ultimately you're kind of thinking, if there is nothing after I die, if none of the actions in my current life matter uh, after I die, and the death is inevitable, then why does my current life matter? Why do the things that I do in this life matter? Why should I not just aim for maximal pleasure? Because there's no consequences. Like, why would that stop? You know, the wealthy king, the powerful king, from deciding to be like Raskolnikov, to the nth degree, and steal from all these people, steal their women, steal their wives, and just go for the maximum amount of pleasurable things. And the more you think about it, the more you're like, well, actually, the values and the things in this life aren't wrapped up in the things that you thought they were, like wealth, like fame, like power, whatever. Like, those things don't actually make your life enjoyable in this life, disregarding the fact that if there is a heaven and an afterlife, that might have consequences for you down the road. But still, I think the point holds that if there the idea of an afterlife or a world where your actions in this current world have consequences for your life in eternity, it helps ground people's actions. I don't know who said this, but there's like a quote like, I don't believe there's a God, but I think we should all act as if there is. Or I don't know if there's a God, but we should certainly act as if there is, because we should act as if our actions in the current world have consequences for the next. And I remember your question. It was, when do you remember the first time that you kind of remember that you would die? Um, I don't know. That was my way of
Hmm.
saying it, but it's been consciously on my mind for a long time. Uh, and I think as a kid, I wanted to imagine that it wasn't the case, that it wasn't going to happen. And then, if you're lucky enough to never have anybody around you pass, um,
You don't have to think about it that much.
you don't have to think about that much. I I kind of, as I kind of got to like 7, 8, 9, 10, there was a series of people in my family that passed, and so it was kind of unavoidable, I would say. Um, and I don't know that I have an answer, because if we all act as if death is the worst possible thing, then the way I look at it is, if we're left in a position where we fundamentally agree that death is the worst possible thing, then it is possible for someone to, not only is it possible for someone else, another human, to like do something so horrible to another human, to inflict the worst possible thing to that human, but it also means that any god that does exist has permitted that worst possible thing to humans to happen. That highest amount of suffering. And I, number one, I'm coming from the fact that I don't think humans, we have that much control. I don't think I think there is, I'm not willing to afford that much power to an individual or a group of individuals or even a nation to be able to inflict that amount of damage to another group. For example, I'll bring this to a current thing. I'm not willing to accept that when the bombs that are flying in Gaza and killing all of these innocent children and people. It's not that I want to give like the IDF any pass or whatever, but I'm not willing to accept that they have that much power to do that much damage to individuals. That's number one. And I'm also not willing to accept that the second point, which is probably is going to be less harder to convince other people, but I'm not willing to accept that God would allow that worst possible thing to happen, even though He does obviously allows people to kill each other, and for death on a massive scale to happen. This was very long winded, and I'm going to stop there. But the short answer is, I don't know, but I have been thinking about it for a long time, and I want to flip the question back to you. Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah, I do, and I think it's a formative moment to a lot of people. At least there's a specific moment. I remember I was in a church school actually, and we were singing some hymns, and then I sort of just like wandered around and I stopped singing, and I was just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna die at one point, and then there's gonna be nothing. And I was just like weirded out by this. It caused like a sort of bizarre moment of like, well, what does that mean when there's nothing, you know? And I remember trying closing my eyes real hard, like squinting, being like, it would be something like this. But then I'm like, oh no, wait, that's still black. That's still like something. And I was disturbed by my inability to picture nothing, you know? And yeah, I remember that quite vividly. And I guess that's when you could say, in a sense, sort of the institution of the church failed to me. If we take failed for me, if we say take this cynical view of, um, at least institutional religion being a way to quell the fear of death. Um, but yeah, even though we don't often think about it, except for you, of course, you seem to be thinking about it a lot. But most of us tend to not think about it. It still affects you in the most ways, in many different ways, because well, when you don't think about it, clearly in my case, I had sort of a very disturbing thing that I don't want to think about a lot. So you repress this thought. But when you repress something, it doesn't just disappear. This is, I think, the best insight from Freud. It's the return of the repressed. That the thing that you repressed and you don't want to think about still comes back in sort of like different ways, in a sort of vampiric form almost. You know, it's sort of like if you're at a party and you ban a guest from entering the room. He still manages to sneak in with like different disguises or something. And as you were saying before, sort of every fear has nursed within it a hope, and so most of these hopes, I think, manifest themselves as like a desire for symbolic immortality. If you don't do it in the traditional religious sense, where you seek immortality from religion, then they manifest as a desire for symbolic immortality, and that's the whole institution of morality. You can see it as such. I may die quite soon, but at least I have a special place in the universe because I'm acting morally. you know or it's obviously desire for to have children, to sort of expand family, and even sort of institution and culture. These are things which outlast your death and are supposed to be like more real than everything else. um I mean, this view here is um, it's Becker's view on the denial of death. He talks about this, and I mean, you don't have to look at everything. He sort of says that pretty much all of human culture is this desire for symbolic immortality. Sublimated fear of death causes almost every single one of our actions. And I mean, there's even been empirical studies on this, which at least point to some kind of things, like judges, for instance, when they're giving out sentences, if they're sort of reminded of the fear of death before they give out sentences, they tend to give much harsher sentences. And the thought behind this is that um, they're sort of like reminded of the fear of death, which gets them scared and wants to seek security inside the sort of institutional um, justice system, which they feel is something that's outside of them and more real. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's good actually that you think of the fear of death a lot, because it means you're facing up to it, and you're not sort of like mediating it through um, these like different forms, these apparitions. And well, to bring it briefly back to Kierkegaard, I'd say that I think we can acknowledge that if you're religious just because you want immortality based on the fear of death, you're not really getting it. You're not having a true appreciation of what it means to have faith.
Well,
Yes, but
go
I
ahead.
think the key thing, the interesting about fear of death, when you get it from a Buddhist perspective, and in parallel to what we've been talking about so far, is that even the fear of death is one step removed from what we actually want to do. Becker and existential psychology seeks to sort of explain our actions through the repressed fear of death. But I think even the fear of death sort of could be um, a repressed fear of something else, which is sort of the religious drive we're talking about, the meaninglessness right now. I mean, you were saying that death is the worst possible thing we could think about, but I don't think that's quite true. Death isn't that bad. I mean, comparatively to lots of other things that could happen, death is not that bad at all. And it's sort of the fear of meaninglessness right now, because death is sort of a horizon upon which after that everything you've done is meaningless. And the idea is that even the fear of death is a sublimated fear of meaninglessness right now. It sort of delays it. So you don't have to think about it right now. You don't have to think about how everything is meaningless right now. So you put it into the future. You use time as a sort of delaying mechanism to be like, oh, this will be something for later, right? But in reality, it's right now, a problem that you have to deal with right now.
I'll say this because I told you that I think about it a lot, and recently when I was thinking about Kierkegaard, I kind of came to this realization, and then I'll add a caveat after I explain this. But this I haven't read a lot of Nietzsche, I haven't read a lot of Buddhism, but from Kierkegaard, the idea that fundamentally yourself on its own is like insufficient, like this idea that you can somehow make your life worth more, make your life better, reach some kind of higher purpose on its own. This idea that that's impossible, and that your self, as it relates to something else that's not God, is fundamentally flawed and insufficient. Well, just taking that and kind of applying it to everyday life and reflecting on my life and my experiences, and this is an argument that Plato makes, I think, in the Phaedo, or Socrates, depending on how you read it. But I think about the things in my life, and I have conceptions of the ideal. I have conceptions of not understandings, or not, and conceptions is the wrong word, but I understand. I I internalize that there is something better in the things that I am doing. And I have to be careful about the language, because I'm not saying so much that it's like something that I can achieve, but I recognize that there is inherent limitations in those certain in my life. There's just certain limitations, not necessarily that can be improved or fixed with actions that I do, with circumstantial changes, but just that are inherent limitations. I see kind of like shadows of the fact that there is something better, higher, but that I can't obtain, that's fundamentally limited. And so as I'm living my life, and go and striving to obtain things, striving to have things, seeing value in various goals, various people, various emotions, whatever they may be. I do see that value, but I see it in a way that such I'm only seeing a portion of it, a part of it, a limited version of it. And the value that we ascribe to those things in society is that limited version of it. It is not the highest. Like the things that I strive for are fundamentally still limited in that life, that there is something higher. And so I take that and say, okay, the fact that I can still that I can still understand that there is that this is a limitation to life, for me, means, and I understand that there's arguments that can be made against this, but for me is enough for me to feel like that means that there is something beyond this life. And so I had kind of came to that realization, and that argument I didn't buy before, because I had trouble recognizing the fundamental flaws in my life's existence and the things that I seek. But now that I feel like I fully grasp that, I think I gave up from a deep perspective the fundamental fear that I had of death. Now the caveat is I still don't want to die. I still feel like,
I would hope so.
yeah, there's a litany of things that I would like to achieve, a litany of experiences in life, however flawed they may be, because we all have this, right? We have expectations, we have, um, you know, we have kind of, when we set out to do something, we have expectations of what those things are going to be, and often they fall short. In fact, I've never had them completely meet those expectations, not even in just terms of like the things that I thought were going to happen happened, but in terms of the feeling I would experience from those things happening was not the feeling or emotion that I anticipated or I wanted to happen. It was always less than what I wanted. But mind you, I still want those things, and mainly, and I think there would be a fundamental flaw in this from Nietzsche and somebody else, but mainly because I want some kind of value in those things. Um, I want I want to leave behind in this world a certain meaning and value based on accomplishing those things. And that was convoluted in saying it, but what I mean is I want my life in the sense of I want the Athenianos that is the self relating to Athenianos to be to have meaning and to be shaped in the way that I want it to be shaped and to live and to accomplish and spread the things that I want to spread in my life. And I feel like if I was to die now, I would feel like I wouldn't be able to experience and pass on and have that meaning. But when I reflect back, I still feel like fundamentally I've made leaps and bounds in avoiding in being okay and accepting death. I feel like I'm at the point now. I'm at that. There's a great quote. He's an asshole, but there's a great quote by Woody Allen.
Hmm.
He said, "I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there where it happens when it happens." And I feel like that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, well, that was a lot, but um, yeah, I mean, it harkens back to what I was saying. Like, it's sort of death in itself. I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think, in fact, it's the precondition for a lot of what we care about. Almost is that we're going to die. Because, I mean, I don't think immortality per se would be particularly desirable. Not at least immortality as conceived of us right now in physical bodies and who we are, because a lot of the urgency we have, the reason we find value in doing things is because um, we have a limited time to do it. Right? If we were immortal and we had infinite time, we would just there's never any urgency to do anything. There's no reason to do anything right now because you can always do it tomorrow. Um, and so I think the way our lives are sort of structured and so the value is given in our lives is from the very condition that um, death is included in them. And that's again sort of a false duality that we pop up between like life and death, that sort of they're two separate things and they're opposites to each other, as if like one could coexist without another. But they're both just dependent on each other, and they're both part of like a whole thing. And yeah,
Um, do you have anything else more to say on the subject? I think I think one thing I'd like to do, I would really like to do, is I'd like to bring in like a panel of like maybe like we can get together like 7 or 8 people and just one by one ask them lead the discussion with the question you just asked me at the top of this segment, which was like, do you remember the time that you first realized you would die?
Yeah, I
I
mean, I
would
think
love that.
it's a great question because it gets to the core of what a lot of people are doing and the reasons why they're doing what we're doing. I mean, I don't think it's the reason I was saying before that I ask it to philosophy students in particular. I think it's a haunt for most like intellectual people in general, or people who aspire to be intellectuals. I won't power myself up like that, but it does very often stem from this fear of death. You know, this need to be realized or recognized in some like special way. To yeah, and I think it drives a lot of behavior in most other fields. And sort of the relationship you have to death is obviously very indicative to the relationship you have to life, which is fundamentally core of who you are and how you relate to the world.